Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this evening's session. My name is Askia, and I'm one of the event planners for the Redmond Reactor Space. And before we get started today, I've got a few things I'd like to go over. So if you could take a moment to read our code of conduct, we put that in the chat as well. And basically what that says is that we seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and if possible, please try to stay on topic. We're going to be sharing useful links throughout the chat, so please keep an eye out for that. And we want to let you know that this session is going to be recorded and will be available on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. So with that said, I'd like to hand it over to our presenters for introductions.
Hey everyone, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I know I'm joining you from my morning in Australia. Chris is joining me from the other side of the world in the US. And we're going to talk to you all about PL-300. We're focusing on the Power BI Data Analyst role, and we want to make sure that you're as prepared as possible to sit the PL-300 exam, focusing on preparing your data. So as I said, my name is Heidi Hastings. I am a data platform MVP and MCT. You're welcome to reach out to me on socials. I'm coming to you from Australia, hence the accent. I love doing the different certifications. I think at the moment I'm up to about 15, but I always love the process of going through and studying and learning and then trying to test my knowledge by sitting the exams. And what about yourself, Chris?
I'm about a dozen certifications behind you, I think, and that's only assuming that I get to do the renewals for the ones that I've got coming up. But hi everyone, I'm also a data platform MVP. I split my time between Texas, where I am tonight, and New Mexico, and it's great to be here with you all. All right, so we've got people coming in from everywhere, but we'd really like this to be a live session, as interactive as possible. So please get all your questions in the chat and just say hi. Just let us know where you're watching from this evening, this morning, whatever is appropriate for you. We've got some great moderators hanging out, taking questions. We've got Vahid and Arul Prakash, both data platform MVPs. I can see in the chat that Shannon and Pam have dropped in to help everybody out. So yeah, send the questions, and I can't imagine there are any questions that the four of them won't be able to answer. But if for some reason they can't, or they think there's a really interesting one, then they'll pass it along to us and we'll answer it live. So yeah, thanks to the four of you for helping out this evening.
Looks like we got some mail, Chris.
Ooh, very nice.
Of course, we're talking Power BI's birthday, like 10. Already it's 10.
Can you believe it? So we've got a lot of good events coming this month and next month. The first event of which is this series of sessions about taking the PL-300 exam. And I think we've got a little bonus for you all on the next slide there with regards to that. And it's a birthday present for everyone, a 50% discount. And it's not just for you taking the exam PL-300, which is the Power BI Data Analyst exam. Excuse me, but also those of you who are interested in taking DP-600, which is the Fabric Analytics Engineer exam. It's a great discount. There's probably some terms and conditions, but follow the little dinosaur QR code and get on that right away. And I think one of the other events we'll be having, it kicks off June the 24th, we'll be having a data viz contest. Shannon and Elena will be kicking that off. So join us, get to know the data set, get to know some of the details about how you can submit to enter the contest. Heidi, do you think you're going to enter this one?
I mean, Viz is not my specialty, but the thing I like about this is it's for all levels. So if you're a beginner, go along to learn the different tips and tricks from the different visualization people out there. I'm lucky to have someone like Kerry Kolosko based here in Adelaide, Australia as well. So she's a visualization whiz. Check out the stuff she does. But yeah, not my forte, but I love watching these because you learn all the tips and tricks. You learn what's possible. and you can keep improving over time. So eventually I'll get there, but for the moment, Copilot's just helping me build my reports.
There you go.
And if any of those weren't your cup of tea, then something else you can look to do is become a super user. So even though it says Fabric super user, Power BI being part of that Fabric ecosystem now means you can be a super user within the community. These are really cool things to do because you're already going to join the community. If you haven't already, definitely sign up. That's your avenue to getting help, support, tips and tricks, join with other like-minded professionals out there in the world. You might want to get into writing blog posts. I've tried to do that every so often. I'm not the greatest at it, but I love doing it because I remind myself how I've achieved different things over time. I think you've got a blog as well, Chris.
Yes, I would say an infrequent one, let's say.
But yeah, blog posting is something that's great to share how you achieve something, even if it's just to remind yourself in 6 to 12 months' time what you did and how you did it. Publish tutorials and demos, so that helps different people within the community get started. And then give kudos, which is basically giving credit to other people within the community for helping out or posting something that's helped you, so they can be influenced in that way. But these things give you avenues to also talk to Microsoft, which is always fun. So have a look at that Fabric super user. And later this year in Vienna, in Austria, is the second annual Microsoft Fabric Community Conference. Earlier this year, we had the Fabric Community Conference in Las Vegas, and there was over 6,000 people attending that, including speakers, vendors, and people from the community. So have a look if you are either based in Europe or have the opportunity to travel, whether that be for professional development or personal travel. Maybe consider coming along to the Fabric Community Conference, where you can learn from both Microsoft and from community professionals about all things Fabric, including Power BI, including data visualization, and talk to the different people about how they're achieving things and ask your questions. Same way you're doing today. Ask those questions in the chat. Also consider coming to the community conference and asking the question there. But don't forget to take advantage of these discount codes when you see them. So if you are looking to go to Fabric Community Conference, do look to leverage that Fab Live, because that's 200 UK dollars there. That's a great saving. I know for Australian conversion, that's awesome. That's about probably more like $400. And I will be traveling over to FabCon because I think it's an awesome event to be able to connect with the community and also learn a lot of stuff in the space of a week. And you're joining us today for the first of the PL-300 series in the APAC time zone. Of course, we're running this event in 2 different time zones, one PT. So those of you who attended the very early hours of Australian morning, probably about 8 hours ago, they started with the prepare your data using Power BI. We're going to cover that today in our session. And then there's more. So if you want to look at using modeling within Power BI or visualization, as well as managing and securing, so that'll talk more to Power BI administration within the service. And then finally, the exam prep, which will give you those tips and tricks for on exam day. How do you get yourself ready? How do you get through the exam itself? Any sort of logistical things that might be what you want to consider, and accessibility requirements. So this session is being recorded along with all the other sessions of the series. So go back and check them out. You're going to learn a lot as we go through today, and you'll learn a lot through the series, but also look to do the Learn modules, because these sessions are based on those Learn modules. So as you're learning today, you can go and revise your learning by taking the Learn modules for a different perspective.
And speaking of different perspectives, you can watch this same session about, preparing our data, but delivered by Shannon and Steph from this morning. So maybe you don't quite vibe with what I'm saying. That's okay. There are other options. So go ahead and watch both, compare and contrast, and you'll be even more prepared by watching both sets of sessions.
Exactly.
All right, so I think that's all the intro info out of the way. So let's jump into the real meat of the session today. And we're going to be focusing on preparing our data. So here's the simple agenda. So we're going to start off, we'll do a quick overview, both of the PL-300 exam and then just of Power BI itself, because we know there are going to be people on here that have been using Power BI all 10 years. And then there's probably some of you that have only been using it for 10 days. So let's get everybody on the same level there. And then we'll go through kind of the 3 main objectives just of this portion of the exam. And that's to get the data, to profile the data and clean it, and then to transform and load it into our semantic model. And then we'll talk a little bit about some tips for success on the exam. We won't go into that too far because the fifth session in the series, and Heidi, I think you're doing the APAC one with Martin there, is going to be just a full hour long of the best way to approach taking the exam and preparing for it. All right. So looking at the exam itself, so I'm just going to start out by pointing out it's just one of 3 exams, and it's all based on, sort of, the role that you play within your company or your career to do with Fabric and Power BI. So this is PL-300. This is for the data analyst. It's for the folks that are working in Power BI all day. And then if you're moving on to the Fabric side, if you're a more generalist on the Fabric side, so you're doing some Lakehouse, you're doing some warehouse, you're building the Power BI semantic models, and then the DP-600 exam might be right for you. But if you're that dedicated data engineer, you're just moving data around all day, maybe you're using the real-time intelligence features, then the DP-700 is going to be the right one for you. But yeah, again, this series we're focusing on the PL-300. I know if you go back in the React to YouTube history, you'll find some series about DP-600 and DP-700 as well, if you're interested in those exams. All right, so this is a very wordy slide. I'm not going to read this top to bottom, but this is going to help you determine if you're the right person for this exam, or this is the right exam for you. So it's really, are you somebody that's, you're a data analyst, you're a report writer, we're expecting you're already working in Power BI. You don't need to have been in there the whole 10 years, but you should be comfortable doing what it says there: prep the data, model it, visualize, secure the data. And you should be comfortable with using Power Query. You should be comfortable with using DAX. Maybe you're a report writer. Maybe you're collaborating with like the engineers on the team, and you're building sort of a self-service product that you can hand off to the end users. That's the kind of person that we're hoping to talk to right now. All right, so then this is kind of a quick breakdown of the skills that are going to be covered by the exam. And you'll notice very cleverly that we've chosen to set this series up, to model these as well. So this session is the first quarter, and it's about preparing the data. Then the second session next week will be modeling, then visualizing and analyzing, and then ending up with the securing Power BI. So we get a little more detail on the next slide. And these are the 3 things I mentioned before. We're going to get data, we're going to profile and clean it, and we're going to transform and load data. But there's a lot more detail in the study guide. You see the link here, and it tells you under each of these kind of board categories, getting data, what does that really cover? What skills do you really need to have? So kind of the first tip I've got is, go to that study guide, copy it somewhere, make sure that you can find, where to go for each bullet point in that study guide. Is it a link, a blog post, a Learn article? And make sure that you've got all those things checked off. But that's what we're going to be covering today.
Yeah,
and I think,
definitely.
Heidi, can you give us a quick overview of Power BI itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So with Power BI, of course, Power BI was a standalone product prior to the introduction of Fabric. With Fabric coming into the ecosystem, it meant it created a bit of an umbrella over the top. So Fabric is a software as a service end-to-end analytics platform. If previously you were going app.powerbi.com, and you can still go to that, but if you go app.fabric.com, you're also going into that same experience. Just the app.powerbi.com is pre-going to the Power BI space within that. So your menu items are contextualized to that Power BI space, so you can create reports and visuals and dashboards. So with that, Fabric interface. When we're in there, we've got not only Power BI, but we have another number of other platforms that we can work with inside. So we have the Data Factory element with pipelines and data flow Gen 2s. We have engineering workloads where we can work with notebooks. Those are Spark notebooks. We can look at data warehousing within Microsoft Fabric. And these are cool because these are all things we can integrate with Power BI because they're seamless in that same platform. We also have data science. We can do machine learning and environments. We can do real-time intelligence. So our streaming data sets, we can visualize those as well and have them natively integrated within Fabric and therefore available to Power BI to consume and visualize them. We can use all those different data elements to cleanse and prep the data. But in this case, we're going to focus on using Power BI to prep and cleanse the data. So there is overlap with those other products, but each one has their own sort of place in the field. If you're not doing any of the Fabric stuff, that's possible where you can just work with the Power BI items and Power BI workspaces, or you can only work with Power BI items in Fabric capacity-backed workspaces. The options are sort of endless, but that's the overarching ecosystem, and I wouldn't be commonplace if I didn't mention that there is Copilot. In fact, there's at least 5 Copilots within the Fabric experience, one specifically for Power BI to be able to help you build your reports and have conversations with your data. So that Power BI ecosystem that we talked about has a number of places. So we've got our Power BI desktop. That's a free product that you can download and install on Windows. There is an element to which you can use Power BI on Mac. It is not as feature rich as if you're working with Windows, but Microsoft's introduced a number of the features inside the service itself. So that app.powerbi.com or app.fabric.microsoft.com, going to the service, that's what we refer to as the service. Some people call it a portal. That also allows you to work with Power BI, both in an edit aspect and a view aspect. And we have the mobile experience as well. There's not a lot in the mobile experience when it comes to going through this exam, but it's important to be aware that mobile is an option because it affects things like your page layouts and your sizing of elements within and how your users are going to work with and consume that data. We have a number of data sources, which we're going to go through in depth. And Power BI Embedded is not called out specifically here, but it is part of the Power BI stack. So it allows you to embed your Power BI reports and dashboards within either your custom web applications or websites, or whether you're doing things like embedding in a SharePoint site internally within your organization. But that's the overarching ecosystem that is Power BI. And this is a nice little way of putting it. And when you go in deeper and all the different little feature sets, it's probably the size of an A3 page filled with icons. I believe Melissa Coates has an awesome Power BI diagram from a number of years back as Power BI started to grow. And it's quite a feature-rich product.
Heidi, there's a question here in the chat that I wanted to get your input on. Tatiana's asking if we have to have Power BI Windows for modules and to prep for the exam, or can we do them on the Mac? No, I'm not a Mac user, so I can't really answer that well. I hope I haven't just set you up here.
As a matter of fact, I've played with I personally don't own a Mac. I would struggle on a Mac. But I remember SQLBits conference last year in March, I think it was, where I was working with another data platform, BizApps MVP, trying to work out what features of Power BI work well on a Mac. I would say if you're studying for the exam, you don't necessarily need to use Power BI Desktop to do that. So you will be able to use the Power BI service and do the different experiences like getting your data in, cleansing and transforming your data, and publishing your data. So if you are using a Mac and you want to test out Power BI Desktop, it's going to be very limited because it doesn't install on Power BI on Mac. So your experience is going to be through the service. But because Microsoft is making a lot of the features available in both desktop and service, the menu items are very similar in what they're called and where they're placed. But there's some features specifically that occur in the desktop, but the exam is not going to be desktop specific. So it's more going to be, if I wanted to get data, how does that work? Is there a connector for it? What are the steps to do it? Yes, as some people have mentioned in the chat, you can run virtual machines. Virtual machines, if you're a dev-heavy person, if you're more of a pro coder, that is something you can look to do. Perhaps spin up an Azure virtual machine or Azure Desktop, or use some of the labs that are available with different exercises that you can do. So completing those learn modules where you'll be able to see those simulations, but also watching a number of the videos out there. So there is the Power BI YouTube channel. We've got the Reactor YouTube channel as well. Then there's some other industry experts, which I think we're going to mention a bit later, who are also doubling as Microsoft employees. Guy Cube with Adam and Patrick. Will Needham has a series on it. You can watch the videos to learn how the desktop specifically does things. But using services, you're going to be your most advantageous approach to get that experience without needing to install a desktop. That's what I'd go with.
Awesome. All
Now you're
right.
going to talk about getting that data, hey, Chris?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the first step in any Power BI project, right? Is getting some data in. So it's a good place to start. So don't be too scared by this this next slide. Okay, there's a lot going on here, right? This is a bit of a marketing slide, I'm going to be honest. But what jumps out to me is right at the top, 275 plus data sources. And then there's 100 plus icons there of data sources. And that's a bit overwhelming, right? But don't worry. For the exam, we're just going to focus on the ones that are most common, that are the most important, that you'll see all the time, right? So a lot of data is going to come in as text files, whether that's CSV format or pipe delimited. That's going to be a good one to know. And then anytime we're dealing with business data, Excel is going to be in the mix as well. All right, so speaking of Excel, there's a really good video from Adam Saxton, Guy in a Cube, and Eskia, if you could drop that link into the chat, where Adam really dives into all the different ways that you can use Excel to get data into Power BI. So I'm not going to cover that here. Adam does a far better job in 8 minutes than it would take me 20 minutes to even know where to begin with that. So watch Adam's video there. But really, we're just identifying, like, okay, what are the most common sources here, right? And a lot of data is going to come from our business systems. So probably a SQL database, or a database that uses SQL like Oracle or Postgres. And that might be an on-premises database. It might be a cloud database like Azure SQL DB. So those are going to be really important to focus on. You're going to want to look at situations where you're picking from a list of your tables and views what to bring over. But also you're going to want to be looking at, maybe I'm writing a SQL query, and I'm just sending the SQL query to that SQL database and bringing back the results of that data set. So both of those are going to be very important to the exam. And then you want to touch on NoSQL databases like Cosmos DB. I'm sure that'll come up on the exam, but really we just want to be familiar with anywhere where you can go to the Get Data button in Power BI. And like if you go to the home and the ribbon, Get Data just stares at you on the left, right? That's the place you're going to start everywhere. So make sure you're familiar with that. All right, so what else is important here? Well, we're going to be talking about shaping, cleaning, and transforming the data in a little while. Gee, Heidi, can you go back just for a couple of seconds here? Yeah, so we're going to cover that second point in more detail later on today. Again, we want to make sure that you're comfortable connecting to both on-premises and cloud data sources. Yep, and this slide mentions the custom data connectors. I don't think there's going to be much, if anything, on the exam about that. When I go to the study guide, I can't find anything about the custom data connectors. So I think you're safe not having to know that piece. Yeah, don't spend too much time there, but there is going to be a lot of Power Query, though. All right, so let's move on to the next one, because this is going to be important as well, is to know the three main storage modes. And now you're saying, Chris, there's clearly 4 lines here, right? Well, we're going to not worry about the last one, right? It's Direct Lake is specific to Fabric. That's not going to be covered on this exam. I see a lot of you from the chat are interested in DP-600. Yes, you'll need to know about Direct Lake for that, but not for PL-300. It's the other three that are going to be important. Now, I also think there's maybe a couple columns missing here, because it's important to know where our data lives and to get a sense of the comparative performance. But one thing I think we need to understand, like import mode and the import part of the dual mode, that data is only as good as our last refresh, or only as current as our last refresh. So it may not be right up to the minute, whereas direct queries going straight back to that source system, and your data is right up to whatever's in that source system. Right, so I'd maybe add a column for like live data versus refresh, and then you for import or dual, do you schedule your refresh? So maybe my Power BI model is updating at midnight every day or at 7 a.m. every day. Right, so that's going to be a key difference between those three. And then just know that you can see from the performance, but know that there's a little bit of a trade-off. Just for a direct query, it's great to have the live data. It's great to be up to the second, but then you don't really control the access for the source. You don't control the table structure or the indexing, so it could be really slow. So there could be a pretty heavy kind of performance penalty for getting that up to the second data. Heidi, is there anything else you'd like to add about the storage modes here?
The other one's with your security element. If you're working with some data sources, as soon as you import in that data, their security goes out and the Power BI security comes in. So if you're importing data in, you're shifting your security construct from your source into your reporting layer. And so you want to make sure if you've got any row level, column level controls that you want on, you're going to make sure that applies in the import space. With direct query, of course, you can have the ability to pass your authentication all the way through. It's a common pattern when people are working with, say, Databricks Unity Catalog as their data source. Then when they're doing the direct query, the security is applied at the source. But it also means every time someone's loading that report and a visual on that report is translating that visual into DAX, then translating it back to the source to run a query against that source system. So you can put a fair bit of load on your sources when you're working with direct query there. And that dual scenario, having a mix, that kind of is common if you're doing things like you have dimensional data where it's not changing very often and you just want to import that in as a static set. But your direct query is your live operational system where you want to get that factual data, the transactional level. It might be your sales or your orders. You want that direct and live. But every so often is when you're updating like your list of products. So you might import in the list of products, but direct query your live systems. So I know that question sort of comes in chat.
I see that too, where kind of you need real-time data, but the fact table is just very large. So you might, do import on all your facts up to the end of the business day, and then direct for anything that's coming in that day.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it really well, Chris. There's a person in the chat who was asking, hey, if we use Fabric Lakehouse, then we don't need to consider import or dual. Am I right? I think the short answer is no, because the decision of import or dual is not whether it's Fabric Lakehouse or not. It's what business outcome you need from your analytical report. But I don't know if you had some thoughts on that, Chris.
Yeah, I will say there's a project that I've been working on now where we built it in Direct Lake originally, and because of some of the complexities of the drill downs on the reports, Direct Lake wasn't cutting it for us. So we actually had to go back to to import, even though we were in Fabric. But if you're familiar with Marco Russo, he's got a great blog post about the decisions behind, even when you're in Fabric, when to use import, when to use Direct Lake. So go check that out. If you just Google for Marco Russo Direct Lake, it'll be the first thing that pops up. I'd recommend that one to everybody.
one little gotcha if you're doing development. If you start with import mode, you can't just tick a box to change it to one of the other modes. So you do want to evaluate what mode you're using over time. But yeah, just be mindful. It's not a tick box that you can just switch. Once you go down one path, you kind of have to redo your get data experience to switch to another mode.
Yeah, I may have had to rebuild an entire semantic model recently.
That's a good learning exercise for sure.
Yeah, well, there's only so many column renames that I need to do in my lifetime. All right, so yeah, so we've made our initial connection using our get data feature. We've chosen our storage mode. So let's double check everything's configured correctly. So are we using appropriate credentials? Are the gateways set up correctly? Things like that. Also for the exam, this isn't something I've used much, so I need to look up, more of this and play with this before I take the exam myself, but using parameters. So a lot of times, this is going to be like you set up to connect with a SQL query, and then you pass in a single parameter from a report. Or you can get fancy and set up like an Excel table to have multiple values and send those multiple values in as the parameter. So yeah, super good stuff. There's a really good exercise on that in the Learn module. I'm pretty sure that one's going to come up on the exam. So I think that covers getting our data. So Heidi, do you want to run through, I think, profiling and cleaning up next?
Yeah, so as Chris said, once we've got our data, everyone will tell you their data is like superb, it's clean, it's great for reporting. Chances are you're going to want to do some cleaning of that data. It might be replacing things like nulls, looking at white space. It may just be looking at, do we have a value in this column sufficient that we can do some analytical reporting or operational reporting for that matter off it. So within the Power BI, these screenshots, of course, from the Power BI desktop experience. So you can't see it underneath the little red, but there will be the fact that it's in the Power Query editor. So once you've said, yep, I want to load this data and connect, this is the experience you're looking at. So it's a little different because you're not seeing the canvas to put your visuals on. You're actually going in and looking at how you're going to transform and cleanse that data. So within the view menu, we get the option to toggle on a series of settings that allow us to quickly see things like the column distribution that we have within our data. So you might want to see, how many distinct values you have, how many unique values you have, whether that is quality, so valid or error. Now that valid or error is not going to be your business data quality rules applied. It's more just going to be Power Query's interpretation of your data. Was it able to process it to be able to bring it back for you to visualize it within Power BI, or did it have some sort of issue? It might be like an erroneous comma sitting in the middle of a column that it can't just figure out. So it'll indicate a bit of an error with processing that data. We can look at other profile elements. So we may be able to look, how many records do we have in total? How many of them are empty? Where it's a numerical value, what is the min and max that we can see in relation to that data? So all those are just at the click of a button, really. We can click in and toggle on the profile and the distribution and be able to see all the information. So inside the actual thing itself, and I wonder if Excel will let me do it. Yep, it will. So you'll see here, this little block that's happening along here. This is all the distribution stuff. So this is only displayed when you have these checkboxes on. Otherwise, it's not there. So you will see things like the data type and the column name and some values. I think it loads about 1,000 to display in the preview. But that's the extent to which you'll see. And then when you toggle those on, you'll get to see those as well. So we can do that evaluation of our data. The other thing we can do when we're in the Power Query window is, of course, apply different transformations so we can cleanse the data. So in this video, it's going to go through and make adjustments. So you can see here we have a table with, 6 columns. So we can see that the customer name has a series of values that are textual, but I want to exclude the blanks. So we can go in and say, I want to exclude blanks. We want to replace those blank values with a different value. So you can do that find and replace on more of a bulk pattern. Now, of course, you want to make sure your business has agreed to what that replace is going to be before you go do it, because otherwise someone's going to look at a report with a value they're not expecting. But for the most part, you can do things like that. We can even filter out data. We can change the capitalization. So we might want to change the format within the string construct itself. So we get all these different options to be able to change. So we can say, yep, this particular product value, we want to be this. The quantity, we want to change the data type on that. We know that quantity is not a textual value, and we want to have all the nulls replaced. So we want to make sure that we're replacing the values, or in this case, we're replacing textual values with numeric values first. Because these steps that we're applying, you'll see on the far right hand side, it's putting in these applied steps. So as we do different cleansing rules, those steps are being added as different transformation steps. So we can go ahead and add and remove. We can also add descriptions against those, and we can change them. But once we've done all that cleaning, we're left with a beautiful, we're out in a forest and our data is clean, and we can use it for anything that we like on terms of our reporting. And you can go back and change the data. So just because we did that cleansing there doesn't mean we can't go back and apply more transformations after the fact. And Chris, you're going to take us through, now that we've got our data in an all clean, rosy format.
Yep.
What are we going to do with it?
Well, let's transform it and let's load it into our semantic model. All right, but transform is it's a fancy way of saying change the shape, right? So we might have a table, 20 columns, 400 rows. Do we need all the rows? Is there something we can filter out? Do we need all the columns? We don't care about, oh, I'm not going to make anything up and embarrass me, but we all know we've got, these wide tables where we only use 25% of the columns, right? We just want to keep what's going to be useful to make our business decisions. That's what this is all driving towards, right? Is it's allowing our business users to make decisions about the business based on having, good data. So, I think this slide that's showing, some of the simplest transformations, we're getting rid of a couple columns. Really, we're actually just keeping the columns that we need, and then we're giving them better names, right? We might want to rename our columns to fit our naming standards, or to fit in with our data governance directives, or even just to make the data more intuitive to use. So now on the next slide here, we've got a video. So we're really just changing the shape of our data by unpivoting the columns here, because I think this one has about 20 different columns. And there's a lot of duplication. Really, we just need to... There we go. It's going over. Really, we just need to get this down to like more rows, but in just 3 columns. So we'll do an unpivot. And those of you who've had to kind of write that from scratch in SQL, you'll definitely appreciate how easy it is to do with Power Query and through the GUI there. And of course, we could, go the other way and do pivots as well. So yeah, very handy here.
Yeah,
and then this next, yeah.
The other thing I
That's
like is that
almost
ribbon.
too easy.
Gives you all those like quick tips. Like it knows some of those transformations you want to do already before you know. So the ribbon kind of gives you a bit of a reminder of these are the things that you might want to do.
Yep. And we've got some more of those on the next slide. Right? We know we're going to have to combine different tables together. So we're going to be merging 2 tables. So make sure you know your inner and your outer joins for the test. And also we might want to, rather than kind of join the tables together, we might just want to like append and kind of stack the rows from different tables together. So yeah, we've got a bunch of options here. We've even got fuzzy matching that we can do in the merge instead of a join. But what's important here is just the sheer breadth of all these different transformations we can do. And if you go to the study guide, you'll see we've got about at least a dozen that they want us to concentrate on for the exams. So focus your efforts there. One of the other nice things, Heidi, I need you to tell me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think for the exam that we really need to know any of the M behind any of this, right? It's all about doing it through the Power Query GUI, and then we can just take the resulting M and use that. I don't think there's anything on the exam where we'd have to sort of write our own M from scratch, right?
Yeah, spot on. The exam kind of is, as you talked about earlier, it's the, you've started with Power BI, but you're not necessarily at the super advanced expert unicorn of your organization. So it's something like M coding is more of that advanced expert level. So because it's an associate level exam, it's kind of like 2 to 3 years industry experience sort of level. So I think it's like M is being aware that there is the ability to go into the advanced editor and see all those transforms in an M language, but not necessarily going in and writing M language or changing it, just being aware that that feature exists, but not necessarily in depth.
Perfect. All right, so what's next?
Well, I saw you had the pen there. I forgot to hit the next button on the slide. I was taking in all the content myself. But yeah, I love this feature, especially when you're getting started with some of it. Like you start bringing in these data sets and you quickly realize, hang on, the business unit gave me these 2 files, but they're kind of like the same data. I just need to put them together. So it's cool that you can just go in and append them, and then you say, yeah, well, it's now one data set as opposed to like these 2 files.
Oh, the business would never.
Of course they would, but that's okay because we love working with them, because we got all these tools that we can use. So once we've done that, like load and configure that Chris talked us through, we now need to relate the different data sets that we have. So you see in this diagram, this is the model view within Power BI. So when you've got things like the canvas view, the table view, the model view, the DAX query view. Really cool view to check out, that DAX query view. But within the model view, we can create relationships between our data sets. So if we've brought in this case, our DIM employee and our fact reseller sales, we can tell Power BI that the employee key in both is related, and the relationship is a one-to-many with the data going from one to many. Key call out here, and you're going to see it in the modeling session, is that relationship, the one-to-many, many-to-many, one-to-one, is really important to understand what that means in terms of how it's going to translate your data when you're viewing it. Because if I apply a filter in the DIM employee, that's going to transfer across that relationship into my fact reseller sales and filter that data set for my visualization. We can also enable and disable queries. So within that Power Query experience, if we loaded a number of data sets and subsequently realize that, hang on a minute, we're not actually using that one in the report we're building yet. So we can go back and right click on that data set and say, enable the load off if we don't want it to load it. That is a common occurrence if you're creating multiple data sets and then appending them, or you're creating a data set and then you're basically you get that one giant flat file and you're going to shard it up into different data sets, whether it's dimensions and facts. And in the modeling session, they'll explain those in more detail. But effectively, dimensions are like grouping, categorization things, and facts are more like your transactions, your detailed level records, and they have a relationship between the two. So with that, we might want to enable the load, but as we start to shard that data set up, we might want to turn it off and only load the final data set that we need. And we could, of course, look at managing our dependencies. So in this case, we're taking that one monolithic file and we're transferring that into 2 different data sets. And so we can see that for the wide table, we loaded initially, and then we're going to do some pivoting, unpivoting. And so we actually want to disable that an intermediate one and only load our unpivoted one, because that's the one we want to work with for our reporting. And we're going to give you a bit of a demo on sort of the steps that we've gone through, because we wanted to show you that you can also work with semi-structured, unstructured data too. So with that semi-structured data, we're going to look at using Lego, because who doesn't love Lego data sets? So this is a JSON data set. Yes, there is an end bracket down the bottom of that, so it is a properly constructed JSON data set. So you can see here we've got different attributes that tell us about, the Lego collection. So we can see the titles, we can see its set number. We can also bring in references to images, because Power BI is pretty cool in that you can do things like images and videos and really enrich your data with those cool elements, and it makes your visualizations really pop. It's kind of really cool. So I'll see if I can get this to play correctly. Of course, I hit the next slide, don't I? Let's see. Here's a little play button. Is it going to let me play it? No. Should have played. Well, what I can do is load it up directly. Stand by. Let me just load Power BI Desktop. Because this should be a video. But we'll just do it live. Yeah, those damn icons get me every time. All right. Okay. Incoming Power BI Desktop. All right. So this is our initial entry to Power BI Desktop. We're going to go with a blank report. And apologies, this is not zoomed in incredibly well. So within Power BI Desktop, we're going to do the get data. So with that get data, we're going to select more because our data set is not one from the pre-canned list. So within the more, we can go in here and then we want to pick JSON because we're using a semi-structured data set of the JSON format. You can use other data sets like CSVs and that structured data types. We can pick our Lego data set here and say open. So that is our initial get data connection to a data set sitting on my laptop. Once that loads, we'll then see the Power Query interface, which is masterfully displayed on my other screen here. So let me just bring that back. So this is our Power Query interface. You know it by the little menu up the top. Within that Power Query, you can see here we're already looking at the data transformed. Power BI is smart enough to know that it's taken our source that's in JSON format. It can interrogate the different elements and attributes, convert it into a table, expand that table because we want this in different columns. So it expands it out, and then it changes the data types because you can see here the data types, that cleansing and transforming we talked about, we can change those data types. And Power BI is really smart. It's just taken that JSON file and done all these steps for me.
So
and I can add
you're
more
telling me I didn't need to write any Python code to shred that JSON?
You can, but we like to help our citizen devs who aren't Python devs or Vibe coders or Copilot coders. Yeah, you can do either. And that's the cool thing about Power BI, right? Because you can do it with Power Query or you can do it with other solutions first and then ingest the data that's already been transformed. So if we already had it in Python into our lakehouse, we can connect with it pre-transformed. We don't need to worry. And once that's loaded in, we can go create visualizations and everything. So I won't talk you through that bit. We'll come back to the deck, but that is how easy it is to bring in semi-structured data within Power BI Desktop as well. Let's see if oh yes, I haven't killed the slides. Great. So performance. I know someone in the chat asked earlier, does the order of steps create any sort of impact? And is there a necessary order you would work with? Yeah, the first one is you only keep the data you want. You know, just because you have this giant file of data or a table that has, 100 columns in it doesn't mean you need all of them in your Power BI solution. Only keep the data that is necessary for what you're working with, including those key columns behind the scenes that you might need. You might not put them on a visual, but you need them to relate the data. Check that you've got the right data types. Initially, Power BI is going to try and figure out what the data types are for your data. It's going to translate from the different source systems of those 270 plus connections and figure out most of them. It has a good idea, but often it'll just put them as like a string, an alphanumeric. So you want to go through and change those data types. Look at reducing the cardinality. If you have a table that lists both your fact data, like your orders, as well as your products, you might want to take the products, put those into a distinct data set of just the list of products. So you're not repeating that product name and code over time, and then create that relationship so that you've got the relationship there, but you're not having to repeat it over and over. You want to look at disabling queries that you're not using. So do that disable query load. And as Chris pointed out, the parameters, those are especially important if you're working with large data sets and you're considering doing import mode. You initially might want to use parameters to filter your data set and then look to switch into things like incremental refresh later down the track, but that way you can work with a subset of your data first, and then once you've published it for wider reporting use, you can expand that parameter to be able to then load the full data set in. So there's a lot of different recommendations you can do when it comes to performance. The query order is also impacted by query folding. What do we mean by query folding? If your data source allows the ability for Power BI to translate into, say, a T-SQL query, for example, if we're loading data from SQL Server, Power BI is going to try and turn all your different applied steps into a SQL query to then run it against the SQL source system. So of course, we want to make sure that Power BI is able to do that translation for us. And we want to make sure that it can do that for as many of the steps as is possible. So sometimes you've got to reorder your steps or apply your transformation in a different way to be able to make sure it can fold. So with query folding, you can go into the applied steps and you'll be able to see a little option to say view the query. So you can view the query that Power BI is trying to generate. So that'll be like a T-SQL query. The other thing we talked about, that with that disabled query load, that's the thing we talked about earlier. When you're in the query datasets area in the Power Query view, and you have the list of datasets on the left for each one that you do like a get data experience for, you can go in and right click them and disable them. It's not super common. It's more common if you're doing a number of transformations, like taking that large singular file and carving it up into different data sets. That's when you're often going to do it. Otherwise, you might never touch it. I mean, I've been working with Power BI for not the entirety of the 10 years it's been around, but a number of years, and I've probably only done it once or twice. And that's predominantly me playing around with Power BI to do it, less about enterprise solutions. But anything you want to add on that, Chris, that you can think of? Oh, we've muted you. Uh-oh. We need to unmute you.
Sorry, I was muted. But I wasn't adding anything to the discussion anyway, because you covered everything so well. And, Shannon and Askia have added a couple links to the chat for people to delve further into those and other videos.
Oh, I will do a little shout out to my Aussie compatriot in Darren Gospel, who of course created DAX Studio. Use things like DAX Studio to help you look at things like the cardinality of your model as well, because you can connect those third-party tools, Tabular Editor, DAX Studio, DAX Query View within Power BI itself, to be able to help you identify these performance things. And there's, if I remember, there's the best practice analyzer, but there's also the performance analyzing that you can do. So you can see how long is it taking to query my data versus how long is it taking to visualize. So the product gives you those little extra helping tools to be able to check your performance. What about some tips for an exam day?
Well, I think the biggest tip is always just schedule the exam, right? Because what I do is I have all the good intentions and I start studying, and I don't have that end date in sight, so it just kind of drops off. So the first thing that I do is I just pick a date. It's the line in the sand. It's when I have to know everything by, and that sort of kicks everything into gear for me. So that's my number one tip for sure. How about you?
I think, I love that idea of scheduling the exam. And I even go to the point of I basically do a backup DR of my exam scheduling and go, I'm going to schedule it for, say, next Saturday. And my DR date is going to be the Saturday afterwards. So if I get some sort of issues, family emergency, don't quite feel ready, I've got my second backup date already carved out in my calendar so that I can shift to there. The benefit with these exams, you can often reschedule them, but you've got, I think it's like 24 to 48 hours before. So if you try and do it on the same day, but earlier you can.
Yeah, just in general, if you can just try to relax. It's only an exam. The worst that can happen is you don't pass and you have to take it again. So it's not the worst thing in the world. So just try and relax, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, and the great thing about with these exams, once you sit them, is whether you sit them in person or you do them remote and proctored from, say, your house or the office, some space that you don't have other people in the room, because that is one of the requirements when you're doing them proctored. But you get instantaneous feedback on whether you were successful or not and areas you can improve on. So they give you a sort of bit of a grading. So with that result, like you saw that visualization was 25 to 30%. So you'll see in the results how you went for that section, not down to the question, not down to the subject area, but that high level topic of whether you were strong or whether you need some improvement. And then they even include some learn modules as references to try and help you do better next time. So I think giving it a go is the best thing you can do, because the exam result tells you, hey, maybe if you studied up on these areas, and failing is okay. Not necessarily going to pass it every time. I failed some of them like 3 times before I passed them. So failure is okay too, because you're learning something from doing it.
Yeah. So I see we've had a couple of questions in the chat. So one was the test isn't free to take. It does cost some money. In the U.S., I think it's $165. You can take it multiple times. I know that the retake window changes, like the more times you take it. What they don't want people to do is just take it like every day and just dump all the questions, into a text document somewhere and share it. So I think you can retake it pretty quickly the first time, and then that retake window grows. Now, it used to be in the past you could get vouchers to get a free retake. I don't know if that's still the case. That's an offer that seems to come and go sometime, but definitely look for that. So that if that's in play and you fail the exam, then the retake is free. David's asking about the format. Heidi, do you want to talk a little bit about the format for the exam?
Yeah, so the format of the exam itself, you have probably anywhere between like 40 and 60 questions, and this will be covered in more depth in the fifth session in the series. But you also get the concept of multiple choice, so whether it's a multiple choice with one selection, a two selection, a three, or the like, you get what's called a build list, which is basically like a drag and drop the steps in order to achieve the outcome. So think about things like workspace administration to apply security. What are the steps that you need to do to achieve that? Or you're trying to do transformations on a data set, you saw us do applied steps. What are the steps you might be able to achieve there? You've got things like drag and drop, where they might have a sentence where you have to populate the missing blank area, and usually that's a drop down that allows you to select a value. And then there's a couple of others where it's a case study. So a case study is a really special part of the exam where once you get to the case study, you get a case study that you can read through and a series of probably up to 5 questions about that case study. But once you get to that section, it's kind of like a, don't pass, go, don't complete. If you get to the case study, you can do the case study once. You can't go back and review it once you've said, I've done the case study, and then you move through the questions. But those are the most common sort of questions you'll get. There aren't labs in this one, so you don't get a pop-up that says, now you're going to sit through a testable lab. For the PL-300 exam, it is all question and answer based. And even though a question may have multiple choice, so different questions have different ratings, and a question can be worth more than 1 point. So you're looking at trying to get like a 700 out of 1,000. And with that, different ones have different ratings. So keep in mind when you're looking at that study guide, if it's saying that there's 25 to 30+% of the exam is this particular subject matter, that's going to give you an indication also of how many questions you're going to get in that area because it's weighted higher. So you're going to get more questions. If an area is only 5 to 10, you're probably going to get less questions in that space. So you want to look at those big chunk sections to give yourself a good chance.
Yep. And Tatiana has a question about how long we think it would take to study for this exam. Which, of course, it depends,
relative?
right? We're contractually obligated to say that. But I think if you're somebody that's working with Power BI every day, that you can probably study 2 to 3 months and get everything you need for this exam pretty well done. If you're not in Power BI like every single day, maybe it's going to take you a little longer. But I wouldn't have thought there was anything in this exam that would take longer than about 6 months to study for.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And with the exam, just remember, like you by watching these sessions, you're looking at getting a 50% voucher. If it's feasible for you to sit the exam, why not try and sit it before August? It's not going to take anything away if you fail the exam. So it's not, you will see it on your transcript that you had an attempt at an exam and a failure, but that's kind of the extent of it. So if you want to use the voucher and give it a go to give yourself, that sort of real world grounded experience of what the exam's going to be like, what the questions are like, get familiar with it, especially if you're someone who has a lot of anxiety with taking exams and tests. Microsoft has improved the platform But you might want to just put yourself through an exam experience just to see how you're going to go. Make sure you take deep breaths and just work your way through the different questions and how much time you need. And don't forget, it's an open book exam because you can actually access the doc modules while you're in the exam. Now, I wouldn't rely on those totally, but it does take a little bit of the stress away. And we'll talk about some of those tips and techniques in the last session in the series because, yeah, you can mark questions for review and you don't get answers. If you get them wrong, it doesn't minus off your result set. It just doesn't give you points. So as you're going through, if you're not sure about a question, don't spend 20 minutes on it. Just spend like 2 or 3 minutes and go to the next one and the next one and the next one and get yourself all the way to the end and come back and review. So I think your preparation depends on you, but I love jump online and check out things like Will Needham's study cram sessions, because sometimes they're like an 8-hour video that goes through the different sections, but it means you can cram it all in. If you're already working day to day with get data and modeling, then you're probably already familiar with those areas and just need to study up on perhaps the administration and the security side. So I think your prep is going to depend on your experience already.
All right, and I think we've got just enough time for one quick last question, which was about renewal. Chris asked about, does this exam need to be renewed? And it does. I believe it's every year, but the renewal exam itself is free, right?
Yes. So the fundamentals exams are perpetual. The associate and expert level exams are usually renewed every year. The renewal period opens 6 months before your expiry. You can go in and sit a multiple choice. Often it's around 25 questions. I've done them sitting on my phone before because those ones are a different experience. You're not in a proctored setting. You don't have to go to a testing center. You just have to be able to access your Learn profile and then go in and sit the renewal. You can resit. So 6 months of resitting opportunity, and you can go through and try it again and again and again.
Great. Well, I think that's about all we have time for today. So as we've said, this is just the first in a series of 5. So come back, the same time next week. We hope to see you then.
Yeah. Thanks for joining, Chris. It's been awesome to present with you for the first time.
Yeah,
I've had a good time, and and in my time zone too, which is handy. But and thank you everyone for attending. Like, keep asking those questions. Join the community. Keep asking there. Join the other sessions. We love getting questions from everyone. We want to help you succeed in your journey with Power BI.
All right, we'll see everybody soon.
All right. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Chris, for an excellent session. And thank you all for attending. We appreciate you giving us your time today. We do have and would appreciate your feedback. So we've got our survey slide on the screen. So if you could take a moment and let us know what you thought, that would be great. And just make sure to reference today's event code, which is 25990. Once again, that's 25990. Thanks, and have a great day, everyone.